Welcome to Project B, Simple Appliances by Group 3. My name is Liza Walsh, and I am the narrator for the group, which is comprised of Christina Call, Kathleen Kaiser, Asha Linares, and myself. We chose the Apple TV Siri remote as our device primarily because we all own one and we're familiar with its functionality. Apple has a reputation for human-centered products, and although the remote has the sleek, beautiful, and minimalistic aesthetic that we had come to appreciate from Apple, we had all had similar and equally frustrating experiences with the remote. We focus on optimizing the task of searching for a movie and performing the basic functions that a user would use to control the movie during playback. We wanted to do this while also focusing on accessibility and intuitiveness. In brainstorming the pain points of the remote, we found that what should have been basic functions of the remote were not very intuitive to the average user. We found that it wasn't clear how to navigate the touch surface, and it was too sensitive to touch. Rewinding and going forward was too difficult to do. Siri gave no visible feedback as to whether voice commands were being registered. There was no quick access to search, home, or closed captioning. The menu button was confusing as it functions as a back button. The remote is small, so it is easy to lose, in addition to the fact that it is also fragile. The remote is symmetrical, so it makes it especially difficult to figure out how to hold it, specifically in a dark environment, which happens to be a typical usage environment for watching movies. Next, we considered the target audience for the improved device. Since our main design goals are accessibility and intuitiveness, we identified a target audience with ages ranging 11 to 65 years old that typically shared subscriptions and possessed a low to moderate comfort level with technology. Keeping our target user in mind, our plan to redesign the interface of the remote would take multiple criteria into consideration. First, we would keep accessibility at the forefront with a convenient, user-friendly interface. We felt strongly that all users should be able to use the new remote easily, regardless of disabilities, level of technical skill, and age. The new remote would need intuitive controls and buttons, including closed captioning, home and back buttons. This would facilitate error prevention. The rewind and fast forward buttons would be clearly indicated. There would be a clear indication of the position of the microphone, as well as sensory feedback for voice control, possibly light or vibration, or both. Visible indicators for the glass touch surface that guide the user in navigating the TV interface. A Find My Remote feature that would play a sound or activate lights on the remote. An indication of how to hold the remote, especially in a dark user environment, by utilizing either an asymmetrical button layout or added texture. And lastly, maintain the minimalist aesthetic that is characteristic of the Apple brand. Our design criteria helped shape our thought process, and we came up with the following sketch to guide the creation of our prototypes. In exploring whether there was a breaking point for aesthetic minimalism, we came up with 4 prototypes with slight variations of our design criteria. 2 which followed closely to the sketch and a minimalist aesthetic, which we called Control 1 and Control 2. 1 which followed more closely to the full list of functions on the design criteria, but with less of a minimalist aesthetic, which we called the Outlier. And lastly, one that fell in the middle, which we called the Middleman. We thought the results we received in user testing on each prototype would give us valuable feedback and help us create a final design. Users were first asked to use the original Apple TV Siri remote to search for a movie and then perform the following basic functions: play, pause, rewind, fast forward, turn up the volume, lower the volume, and turn on closed captioning. They were also asked to explore other functions on the remote, including navigating back to a previous screen, going back to the home screen, and using Siri. Next, users were asked to perform the same tasks using the prototype. We asked users for verbal feedback regarding features that we were physically unable to add to the prototype, including the sensory features such as light, sound, and vibration. Users were instructed to talk out loud while performing all tasks. Lastly, they were asked a few questions to compare their experiences and for any additional feedback. Prototype 1, the control, was constructed by using a combination of cardboard with different textures and buttons to allow the user to actually feel the buttons and textural differences of the remote. Some key points users made in testing were: additional buttons were helpful and did not take away from the minimalist aesthetic on this prototype. The glowing blue circle is helpful to indicate a function, but it is not clear what its purpose was. The added texture is a safety feature and an indicator of holding position. The Siri listening feature is helpful to those unfamiliar with Siri and for those with security concerns. The addition of sound feedback for Siri was also requested. Losing the remote. Users appreciated the Find My Remote and that it added a visual feature while suggesting vibration and sound. Users suggested additional features of a flashlight for convenience similar to the iPhone and headphone capabilities. Prototype 2, the middleman, was created using a printed illustration of the device adhered to foam board for stability during testing. It features rewind and fast-forward buttons to the left and right of the play-pause button. Testing showed that the users preferred the minimal aesthetic of the original Apple TV remote in comparison to the prototype. Thought that the prototype would be better suited to less experienced users, but that more experienced users may not need as many buttons. They thought that the backlit circle with the navigation buttons was a little confusing, which could be due to the limitations of the prototype. They suggested that maybe the back button could also function as a quick rewind in 10-second intervals. They thought that the navigation arrows on the touch surface could be more subtly indicated. Preferred the redesigned Siri function with the indications that the device is listening. Preferred the addition of the closed captioning and search buttons because they need to be quickly accessible. Prototype 3, the outlier, was created using a printed cutout of the prototype with cardboard backing for stability during the testing process. This prototype features rewind, fast forward, and mute buttons, as well as a relocation of the search button to the top left corner and next to the Siri button, to indicate that it is an alternative to searching instead of Siri. Prototype 3 also features a multi-purpose backlight feature that is helpful for using the remote in a dark user environment and additionally illuminates the touch surface to indicate that users can swipe to navigate. The light also turns on when the Find My Remote feature is activated. Testing indicated that users found the additional buttons were helpful, and yet they still indicated a preference for the minimalist aesthetic of the original Apple TV Siri remote. The prototype would be suitable for older and first-time users who would not have to rely on a user manual. The placement of the search button in the upper portion to be ideal, and appreciated that it did not get lost at the bottom of the remote, making it easier to search. The Find My Remote feature would be helpful with sensory feedback, including light and vibration. The back and home buttons on the prototype to be easier to understand than on the original Apple TV Siri remote. The Siri button to be a feature that they would not use and preferred to use the physical interface of the remote over the voice commands. The mute button to be unnecessary. Prototype 4, the Control 2, was constructed by adding a foam base to the printed illustration of the prototype so test participants could have a physical device to hold. Testing with Prototype 4 showed that the users found the accessibility experience was at the forefront, especially with the addition of the closed captioning button. The visual indicators of the system processing when a function is selected is beneficial. The placement of the search, closed captioning, and play pause buttons were in the perfect order. The simplicity of the remote design is both aesthetically pleasing and intuitive. The rewind and fast forward functions could be more intuitive. The Find My Remote feature is a game changer. The sleep mode for Siri is necessary as a security measure. The on-screen keyboard is critical, but it continues to be time-consuming for deaf users, as they would love a quicker way to have their movie search being carried out. The backlight addition is appreciated, especially if one could switch between day and night mode. We reviewed and compared the results from the testing of each prototype and found overall consistencies across all prototypes, including a general preference for a minimalist aesthetic, despite any struggles users may have encountered with the Apple TV remote. Users found the additional buttons to be helpful, but the general consensus seemed to be that all were not necessary, at least not for the specific user, with suggestions for the need for buttons based on age and skill levels. While all users did not agree on exactly which buttons they deemed to be unnecessary, there was an appreciation for the addition of the closed captioning, search, back, and home buttons, and also the touch surface arrow indicators. Users loved the Find My Remote feature with the addition of sensory feedback from Siri. We were also offered some unique suggestions for features users may like, including a flashlight feature, headphone capabilities, day and night mode for the backlight, adding texture for a better grip, an indication that Siri wasn't listening when not in use, a quick 10-second rewind feature added to the back button, and the location of the search button to the top of the remote. All valuable feedback that can be considered in the final revision of the redesigned interface. One thing we did find interesting was that although users generally preferred the minimalist aesthetic of the original Apple TV Siri remote, they did agree on the convenience of better functionality with additional buttons. We think this contradiction warrants more research with a larger group to figure out how to truly make the remote more accessible to a majority of users while maintaining a minimalist aesthetic and minimizing frustration. As part of our final revision process, we updated the design criteria based on our testing results. We found that there needs to be more innovative ideas like the flashlight and headphones to exceed users' expectations and add value to the product. We also included a night and day glow function, textured grip, a 10-second quick rewind, and a relocated search button. And this is our finalized sketch.